Ladies and gents, welcome to the Shroom Live podcast. We meet tonight once again for another episode. This time we're joined by Rob Taylor from Coffs Harbour. Let's talk a little bit about the fellow. So he writes for a monthly fishing column for Fishing Monthly magazine, has a YouTube channel as well, makes plenty of content with great tips for the budding angler. He loves his fishing, of course, does his land base, his boat, also a bit of kayak as well, predominantly focusing on the saltwater. So not so much the fresh, but you'll find him off the rocks, also offshore in the blue water on his watercraft, chasing New South Wales pelagics up in the north. That's just a little bit about the fella. So enough babbling on from me, from Shroom. Let's go introduce Rob. So Rob, welcome to Shroom Live Podcast. How you doing, mate?
Very well, thank you, Shroom, and thank you for having me on, mate. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that I mentioned in that introductory segment there, and that is you write for Fishing Monthly magazine. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I do. So I write a monthly column for Fishing Monthly, and that's the former New South Wales Fishing Monthly magazine, so it's now national. I focus on Coffs Harbour. They call it the Coffs Coast, so it's quite a broad geographic area. It's not Coffs specifically. Sort of ranges from Southwest Rocks, up until kind of Grafton, Wooleye, that type of stuff. So it's a pretty broad expanse of water
Yep.
that's both fresh and salt. But it's mainly a monthly update on what's biting and where, just to give anglers an idea on what's happening on that part of the coast.
Yeah, it sounds like if I was up in that area, I'll definitely tune into that just to find out where the fish are biting, but in particular, Spanish mackerel. So that's the flavor of tonight's podcast. Spanish mackerel from northern New South Wales. So I actually don't even remember even mentioning that topic, guys. If I haven't, that is the topic. And of course, you knew about that because that would have been the title of this podcast as you clicked on it on YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast from. So let's talk a little bit about that in a moment. But Rob, let's talk a little bit about your fishing experience, how you got into it. Have you been like the rest of us, starting very young and being bitten by the bug?
Yeah, pretty much true. I think every angler has, haven't they? I think mine started probably out of my degenerate youth and wagging school. I think when I grew up in Coffs, I'm born and bred Coffs Harbour, grew up there, and me and all my mates, everyone either surfed or fished or both. So if the surf wasn't good, we went fishing. If the surf was good, then we went surfing. But I think many a time we wagged school and got on our little BMX bikes and pedaled down to the harbour there at Coffs and spun bonito off the wall, and that was probably my first, my formative years into fishing was and bonito and garfish off the north wall down at the marina at Coffs Harbour. That's what I used to chase when I was really little, and that all probably started when I was about 9 or 10, I think, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty good youth. I mean, wagging school. I think a lot of my listeners would
Yeah,
attest to
relate
have
to that, I'm
done
sure.
the
Yeah,
same.
yep. And look, let's be honest, we're all still doing it now, but it's just work instead of school, isn't it?
Pretty much. And I guess back then it was just when you wanted to fish. Now, do you chase tides or anything like that? Good weather, good swells.
Oh, look, I think when you're fishing offshore, when you're blue water, you're always subject to the dictates of the weather and the oceans in particular. Off that northern part of New South Wales, like the whole eastern seaboard, really, up until you get to Barrier Reef. You get big southerlies and what have you, and then sometimes long periods of nor'easters. So you really got to pick your windows, and that determines what kind of fish you're going to chase. I guess with the pelagic run, it's really also largely dictated by the east coast current. That's behaving on any given year. When it starts, how hard it's pushing, and where the fish are in it, that type of stuff. So I think pretty much you've got to be on the pulse of these things. Particularly with fish, say like wahoo, they're only there for 2 days and then move on. You've got to wait another week or two before the next pulse of fish comes down. So you've really got to have your ear to the ground, listen to the local intel down the boat ramp, and watching the weather and watching your sea surface charts and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of factors which determine when you go.
Yep. Yeah, makes sense. Now, let's take one little step back. And do you remember what your first catch was?
Yeah, I do actually. My first catch was a garfish off the North Wall at Coffs Harbour there. They were all the rage back when I was a young tacker. And obviously, like any kid, I thought it was a marlin. You just see that little beak not realizing that the bill's on the bottom. And yeah,
Oh right, yeah. I can see that actually.
but just thinking, dead silky. Oh, I got a marlin kind of thing. And that was, I got the bug after that because garfish jumped too. And so I do remember catching garfish down the North Wall with my first fish.
When was your first mackerel, or in particular Spanish mackerel catch?
Well, yeah, that was actually by accident. And then it's been a lasting love affair ever since. I think when I really got into sort of serious fishing, it was land-based game fishing at Coffs, and I must have sort of been in my early teens then, and a group of mates from school who were into and quite proficient at chasing long-tailed tuna. Then they sort of took me under their wing, and we used to fish off Muttonbird Island quite a lot, which is a pretty well-known spot there, land-based game for longtails. And I don't think I'd only caught one longtail by then, so I was very inexperienced on it. And I had put a bait out, and it was a big tailor, I do remember, no wire, and a 4.0 suicide hook in the back of this tailor, and I swam him out under a balloon. And I hooked a fish, which I and everyone else on the rocks that day assumed was a longtail because I didn't get bitten off. And then when it finally got into the wash, and my mate gaffed it, and the water receded, there's about a 20 kilo Spanish mackerel lying on the rocks. None of us could believe it because you don't get them without wire. But he had actually somehow miraculously hit the bait, and the hook had missed his mouth, and it pinned him in the back exactly where you pin the live baits.
Right.
And this is only a little 4.0 suicide, and that was my first mackerel. So it was an accidental capture, but I do remember what I thought when I saw it lying around the rocks, glistening like this big silver missile. And like I said, been a love affair ever since. True.
Like, it sounds like the planets aligned for you to hook it in its back,
Oh,
to be able
certainly.
to fight it on a 4.0 hook, which had every chance of pulling. Somehow you hooked it in that spot, which meant you didn't get snipped off,
Yeah.
and it was 20 kilograms. So that's a serious introduction to chasing mackerel.
Yeah, and it's been a feat like I've never repeated, obviously, but and I do remember.
Spewing.
I'd like to, but it was just one of those ones, like you say, everything aligned, more luck than anything else. But just it was one of those fish. It was his unlucky day, I think. But it was a really big fish, and somehow that little hook stayed in. And that was my first mackerel. I remember it clearly just because it was such a freak capture.
Yep. What about longtails? Because you said that you were chasing longtail tuna, and although we're not technically talking about that in this podcast, it's always interesting because I know that's something that I wish I could chase a lot more of.
Yeah, look, I love longtail tuna, and they are one of the mainstays of the North Coast land-based game run. We don't get yellowfin and stuff off the rocks up around Coffs Harbour or Marlin or anything like that, like you do get down, say, Jarvis Bay off the tubes and things like that. But so longtails, kings, cobia, and Spanish are really what we chase when we're talking about LBG. Longtails being the staple, obviously, and I love them. They're up there with Spanish mackerel in terms of my favourite fish to chase. And we recently did a session down at Southwest Rocks where we were droning them off the beach, but not sort of droning them to find them. We actually put baits out and targeted an area where we thought they'd be, and we got them. But nothing beats Spanish mackerel are a glamour fish. But if you want something that'll really stretch your arms, a longtail is the one you want to chase because their opening run's one of the best in the business, and then it's a long, withering, arcing fight back to the rocks. So they really are a tough opponent.
Yeah, definitely. I still haven't landed a longtail, but I hooked one up in far north Queensland, and I couldn't believe that it never really tired.
That takes a while, but that next couple of months, jump in your car, drive up to Coffs, we'll get you into one.
Yeah, I'll tell you the story about this one anyway. So my friend had just caught, so we were on the boat, right? We're chasing these bust ups in Weeper. So there's a small, I don't know if you've heard of Weeper, but it's
a fish Weeper,
famous.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're around where the markers are, just outside the harbour, and every other moment you might see like a little bust up, and these bust ups were massive. Like the fish were just launching themselves out of the water. Nothing like what I've seen in Sydney. So we motor out to them as fast as possible, cast the metal in, try to rip it through the water as fast as possible, and you'd come up tight once every other cast. Right. So my friend had just landed a 92 centimeter longtail.
Yep.
Now, I wasn't having a good day, so let me just get this straight. So anything that I made, disclaimer that I screwed up my own catch.
Yep.
Disclaimer, I was not having a good day. The planets were not aligned. You know how the planets were aligned for your 20 kegger?
Some days are lemons, mate. Some days are lemons.
It was like the reverse. I had the reverse jinx going on, and I went for a cast. And my leader popped on the cast.
Dang, I hate that.
My friend knew that I was having a bad day, and he knew when that happened, the second that happened, he threw me his rod that he was casting with.
Yeah.
I hooked up. I actually hooked up. So all day we were chasing these things. Everyone was hooking up. I couldn't hook one up. And things such as, the leader popping off, like I just told you, that was happening. I was just like pretty much tail between my legs thinking, yeah, you know what, I should just go back to the cabin and just have a soak there or something.
Have a soak, yeah.
Yeah, and I hooked up and my eyes lit. I was like, oh yeah, here we go. Start fighting the thing. 5-10 minutes in, and I'm telling my friend, hey, I got to tighten the drag. Both my mates at that time were saying, bro, do not touch the drag. It'll tire. You'll get the fish.
You'll get there.
And my friend said, that's the same drag I had on the 92. So it will tie and you will get it. She never tired.
No, they don't.
And I eventually lost the fish. It must have rubbed me off on some, I don't know what it was, but it eventually got me. And yeah, that's what happened to my longtail.
This will probably make you feel bad when we're talking about longtails, but I was actually once, not that long ago, last season I think, I was out on my kayak off one of our well-known longtail spots, and I had two yellowtail out behind me on my kayak, and I saw longtail's little pod jump up, and as you say, they're quite flighty, but they jumped up and they busted up, went down again, but I knew they were sort of going in the direction of where my baits were. Sure enough, one rod went off in my kayak, and I use a stealth pro fish. They're a fast kayak, but they're a little bit tippy. So I pulled that rod off, and this longtail screaming off, and I put my feet in the kayak, then to sort of hope that, well, what usually happens is the fish will start pulling you along and you can get towed along. But the problem is when your feet are in the kayak, you're quite unbalanced. And then the second rod was behind me, which I didn't know about, has gone off with another longtail, and it's ripped off. And it's actually pulled me out of the kayak. I've gone over. I had my glasses on, which was my most important thing. But if you watch the video, you can actually hear the drags going off underneath the water because I'm holding on to both rods. One was when it was an expensive real Talica 12. That's right. So I didn't want to let it go. I had my glasses on in my fingers like that, and the other rod in my hand, and my kayak's upside down, and I'm out in shark territory with two longtails going. But somehow I managed to right the kayak, put my glasses back in one of the little covers I had there. Put both rods back in the rod holders, get back into the kayak's room, and then proceeded to land both fish one at a time. Like I had one, just left him in the rod holder, one longtail. They weren't big, they were only about 12 kilo fish.
That is a Herculean effort right there.
Yeah, well, I think that was sheer luck again too. But I guess it sort of, reflects the power in them. They really, that second fish ripped me out of that kayak. They're a tough little fish. Like you say, they don't give up. It's right to the end. They will circle or arc if you're off the rocks right to the very end.
Yeah. Have you ever had any Spanish mackerel or even other types of mackerel do that to you? Obviously, different class of fish when it comes to fight.
Mackerel, like I said, they're glamour fish, they're greyhounds. So when they hit a bait or a lure, what have you, it's always a screaming run. And it is like a screaming run, second only probably to Wahoo, in my experience. But they do tend to, they've usually got two runs in them. Like they'll do quite a long run at first and you'll pull them back a little bit. And then they just got another one, which is just as powerful, but a little bit shorter. And then they tend to throw in the towel a little bit. So they'll come to the boat a little bit easier than the long tail. You got to be a bit careful with them at the boat, because they then do tend to panic a little bit when they first see it. So, they kick around a bit there. But, I think the longtails are the sluggers, and Spanish are definitely the supermodels, but they do throw in the tail that little bit easier.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, let's talk more about Spanish since, this is definitely where we're going to head towards, into the podcast. I mean, so far, I reckon we could take this in like 100 different directions, but I think the first question that I'd like to ask is, what's something about Spanish mackerel that you have learned about that species, having dedicated all this time towards chasing them out in the blue water, northern New South Wales? all your experiences culminate into understanding them, what would you think would be something that people just don't realize about this fish?
Yep. Okay, well, there's probably a couple of things. I think the most, yeah, the first and foremost is they're actually a deep water fish. But by that I mean, I don't, by that I don't mean that they're in 100 meters or more. Like you've got to go a long way out to the shelf or whatever in deep, deep water to find them. I mean, Spanish mackerel will generally be, swimming in that sort of bottom third or bottom half of the water column. And if you talk to any Spiro worth his salt, I'll tell you the same thing. Spanish mackerel are usually quite deep. So a lot of people tend to focus their efforts on the surface, whether it's baits or lures, they're on the surface. But
Yeah,
I guess a great example is if I'm pulling lures on any given day, this lure with a bib that size, so that's an X-Wrap, that's a very deep diver, it's a big, huge bib on it, so she's going to dig in and go real deep. That's probably an 8 to 10 meter diver. This is a Samaki pacemaker, so it's got a
yeah. So
comparatively.
you've got a Rapala X wrap there, deep
Yep,
bodied
that's the
bib.
X-Wrap. Yeah, big bib, and then a Samaki pacemaker with a small bib. Both of them
Yeah,
will catch Spanish mackerel, but the deep diver, 9 times out of 10, will get the strike before the shallow one will. And I think that just reflects the fact that, the mackerel are usually a lot deeper than people expect. And I find if I'm, pulling baits, it's usually the down rig bait that will go off
oh right. Yeah,
earlier than the surface bait. I usually pull two, like one on the surface and one down rigged, and it's usually the deeper one that goes off first. So, I think that's one thing I've learned over the years. That and I've had days, you run the risk of sounding conceited, but I've had days when I've caught fish and other people haven't, and that's because I've been getting them down deep. I think 2022 was a classic example of this. That was the year we had all the floods, if you remember.
yeah,
So you've got major rivers on northern New South Wales. You've got the Clarence and the Richmond, and our area, you've got your Runga River and Bellinger and all this kind of stuff. So you had, yeah, tons and tons of fresh water coming out in the ocean, and it really was such volume that it did affect water clarity and temperatures for months in our part of the coast. But I was still
yeah,
finding fish, and I go out to the Solitary Islands where I do a lot of the lure trolling, and you look at the water, and it was brown as mud. You would not think that there'd be pelagic fish in it, but I'd be using the deep divers and pulling fish, and quite often with fresh water, it'll sit on top of salt. So, you can have really brown looking water, and Spiros will sort of attest to this too. But underneath it, it's good water. And again, Spaniards are sitting down in the depths underneath that. But I think that's probably one thing that I've learned over the years is don't be afraid to go deep when you're looking for them.
yeah. Now, before I go into my next question, I was going to say that's actually true. How they say the fresh water from the rain sits above on the salt because of the density factor. The density being a bit lighter, and that might. I mean, I don't know if that's the reason, but it could be a reason why fish like to sit deeper after heavy rains. The salinity is just greater down towards the bottom than towards the surface.
Yeah,
And
I think so. I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. And there's a limit. My next point was going to be that Spanish mackerel will also enter or feed and hunt in quite dirty water. I think when people look at them, they think it's obviously it's a pelagic fish, and it's going to be on the surface and there's good clear blue water.
yep,
That's not necessarily the case. I've caught them in pretty green stuff. But there is a limit, and that year 2022 in particular, there was just so much fresh from all the flooding that the water was just mud brown on the top, and they weren't going to be in that obviously. But as soon as I got baits and lures down underneath that, and in some
yep,
spots it was only like a meter or 2 meters that I had to do it. There was fish there and actively feeding. So I don't know a lot of guys sort of looked at that water and went, not even worth the fish, but they were there. So I think sometimes you just got to adapt your techniques on in accordance with the conditions. But certainly with mackerel, my advice would be to always have something down a bit deeper.
yep. Also, circling back, I wanted to ask you about how you found out that they preferred, or actually that they would sit in the lower third of the water column. Was that, was it a serendipitous sort of thing where you just tried it one day and you were targeting something else and then you just kept pulling Spanish mackerel? Or was it, you read somewhere or you met someone and they
Yeah,
told you, hey, give this a try?
well, a very good friend of mine he's a spear fisherman. He has a couple of records. Gavin Smithers, I fish with him quite a lot. he spent a lot of time in the water. He had mentioned it to me a few times, but I never actually sort of made the association. You mentioned it in passing kind of stuff, but I was still in that mindset. Mackerel on the top, so I'm going to have all my lures and baits up on the top. But I think it really does. I think when I really realised it was probably in 2022, because that season uh, there was so much freshwater flooding that it did shut down, or apparently shut down that whole mackerel run. But I then was running these deeper lures and finding fish, and then the penny dropped. Yeah, that's right. Gavin used to say this when he was out spearing, that they were always down low in that bottom third of the water column. So these lures are working. So I started to put two and two together and think, well, yeah, that's true. And then again, I didn't really sort of put them together. But through the years when I've been trolling baits for them, whether it's dead baits or live baits, it was always the downrigger that usually went off generally. So then that all started meshing through in my head, and I think, yeah, actually, there's something in this. This is actually the thing. And then that was the technique I sort of adapted from there. Was that I always had something down deep, and 9 times out of 10, that's what got hit first.
Yeah, I find that very interesting because, like you said, you consider them a glamour fish in the sense that they're the airborne, aerial, spectacular, explosion producers, and that's like for someone like me that doesn't chase them. I can tell you that when I come across a video of a Spanish mackerel, 9 times out of 10, it's a popper or a surface stick bait or something getting launched about 500 meters into the sky, and it's like it's in the sky. It's not even in the water. That fish is just.
And I think that strike in itself sort of confirms or tells you what I'm saying here. You notice when in a lot of that footage that you see where mackerel do strike topwater, they're coming out of the water pretty much vertically, so they're coming straight out and a lot of height. So for a 20 kilo fish, they're getting 8, 10, 12 feet in some instances, and then they're sort of like pivoting in the air and it's going straight back down again. But when you look at that angle of trajectory that they're coming out of the water, much like great white sharks, they're clearly hitting their prey from underneath. So and obviously they've got to get a run up to come out of that with that much sort of velocity. So it does kind of confirm that they are underneath a little bit. They're coming from the bottom. Like they're not tuna, say it's longtails or what have you. They're sort of coming across when they hit baits on the surface. They're going across the top of the surface, going this way. But when mackerel hits, it's definitely always coming pretty much vertically. So
right,
that strike in itself kind of tells you that this fish is coming up from the bottom.
That is such an interesting point there. It's like I was just about to think this fish is getting into orbit, and to get that, the angular incidence is so close to vertical because it has to come from below the surface, far away.
Yeah. You need a run up. You need a run up.
What's the highest one has launched your lure? I mean, you've probably obviously had a few.
Yeah, look, I've had some pretty good surface strikes over the years, but I think the best one I've ever had, and probably the highest, was actually one that had a shark on its tail, and it just come out of the water, and it went, I thought we had to get air traffic control to clear it, 'cause it went right up. It was pretty high. I know that when you watch the video, both Brad and I, the fishes on my channel, so you can see our heads looking up at it, so it was high. But I guess that's a pretty strong motivator when you've got a 13-foot bull shark on your tail. But so the surface strikes are pretty spectacular, and it is the rage at the moment. This topwater stuff, and I do love it. And then for that reason, the strikes, they're very visual.
Yeah, I was just about to say I don't blame the fish for going full steam ahead with the bull shark on its tail.
No, we didn't blame him either. We understood it.
You went on your what you called the tippy kayak, were you?
No,
when you hooked up?
Yeah, thankfully I wasn't on that one. We were actually in the boat, so but they. I mean, that's particularly around some of the islands off northern New South Wales. The shark. We could chat about that further on if you like, but the shark problem can be a problem, and you do have to adjust your tackling techniques to work around that. But it's the same as anywhere these days. Shrooms, sharks are becoming more and more of a problem. Yeah.
What are some other species that you come into contact with, like say bycatch, spotted mackerel, wahoo?
Yep. Well, I mean, this is the beauty of chasing mackerel in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland too, is that the bycatch is also it's a big thing. and I would say you kind of loosely divide it into two main groups. If you're chasing mackerel on the inshore reefs, you generally in there people are slow trolling live baits, or they're trolling dead baits, or they're static fishing under balloons. Your bycatch in there will be longtails, obviously, spotted mackerel. They always show up. The ubiquitous and annoying mac tuna will always be there. You'll get your rat kings. You'll also get your submarine-sized kings in on those shallow reefs. Surprisingly, you pull a lot of snapper, and this is another fish. I know Will Kitchen covered that previously on one of your podcasts, but snapper, in the reverse to mackerel, are quite often high up in the water column when you think they're a bottom feeding fish.
Yep.
I've had so many live baits under balloons go off to snapper. And they're always a welcome bycatch, because they're a great fish. But then when you're out in the deeper stuff and you're, say, trolling hard-bodied lures around the islands and what have you, your bycatch out there, depending on the time of year, will be wahoo, big kings, amberjacks. Sometimes marlin and sails will get in on the act. But yeah, it could be anything out there. But I think, particularly in that sort of February, March period, where you get water temperatures over 24 degrees, wahoo are, a strong candidate, particularly if you're pulling hard bodies, because, that's really the same technique that you would use for Spanish, maybe a little bit faster on the troll speed for wahoo, but, they'll certainly hit a lure at 6 knots, no worries.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you're basically working that EAC like during the year and just reading charts and
Yeah, and and let's all be honest, social media is a big tool too. Yeah, you follow the Facebook groups or whatever, you can always track the Spanish mackerel coming down. You'll hear about them up off, sort of central Queensland, and then the boys on the kayaks off. I follow them a lot, because I kayak myself off southeast Queensland, Moreton, and Fraser and stuff, and you'll hear they're starting to get captured, and obviously you'll see the photos, so they're coming.
yeah.
And I think when they hit our part of the coast, they do tend to come and hit wide first, and by that I mean, say off Coffs, you've got the Solitary Islands Marine Group, the Marine Solitary Islands Marine Park, and within that you've got a number of islands. You've got South Solitary, or the Lighthouse as we call it, on the southern end, and then the Big Island, or North Solitary, up the northern end, which is off Wooleye. And the mackerel will tend, when they first arrive, to hit those islands. So right early in the season, I'll be out there, pulling hard bodies, because that's where the fish will be. And then, surprisingly, we tend to hear of them being caught down at Southwest Rocks before we start finding them on the inshore reefs off Coffs. And it's weird. It's like because Southwest Rocks, kind of crescents out, out into the sea. That's obviously where the shelf comes in close. So I think the current gets pushed in there. So they sort of bypass Coffs, but the biomass tends to bypass Coffs, hit Southwest Rocks, and then, you can always set your clock to within 2 or 3 weeks after that, we'll start getting them on the inshore reefs. But we do get them to the islands early on. It's, every year gets later, whether it's, whether you follow or you believe in global warming or whatever, I don't know.
So it's not getting earlier. It's not getting earlier.
No, I find that we used to be able to guarantee you'd be getting your first Spanish mackerel on New Year's Day, back in the day. Now I don't even really bother, even though you will get hear of fish being caught through January, but I don't really get serious about them through them until sort of February hits proper. But then the flip side benefit is that they are staying later. We're getting in August and September now, which was unheard of before. They used to always be pretty much gone by Queen's birthday long weekend in June. You can put your Spanish rods away then. But now it's weird. It's weird.
This is just hypothesizing, but I can tell you the last couple of years we've had not very hot summers and a lot of rain. Like La Nina has been that weather cycle that we've had. I think we've just entered, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've just entered El Nino.
Yep.
Like I think they actually announced it officially that we are in that cycle. So I don't know if that's had an effect, but it's just,
it certainly does. And I think we've probably had, I would describe them as relatively poor seasons the last, say, 3 to 5 seasons. And you're right, that sort of coincides with, a La Nina event. And I'm hoping that, with the swing now to an El Nino, that we are going to have, bumpy years. And it's weird. You really do get absolute bumpy years where you're going out and get, 8 fish in a session, and then years like, say, last year and even this year was quite slim pickings. They showed up for a week or two and then they're gone again. And You're only getting ones and twos, probably more spotties this year than anything. So, yeah, hopefully that sort of change in that weather system does sort of bring down more fish, and hopefully the Queensland closures and reduction in bag limits will obviously have an impact as well.
Yeah.
Because we get their fish.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, on the reduction of bag limits?
Oh, look, I don't upset people. It doesn't bother me at all. And don't get me wrong. It's one, I don't really eat a lot of fish. The wife does. So when I fish through my sort of only, if I'm chasing mackerel, I only ever really keep one or two, and that's it for me. But that's not because I'm you know hyper concerned that the fisheries has got it right, and now we've got to have all these constraints on us. And in some respects, I think it's very still a guessing game. The science of fisheries
Yeah.
management. But me personally, it doesn't really affect me. If New South Wales introduce a one fish per angler bag limit like Queensland has, that doesn't worry me. But I know it would upset a lot of people, and I can also understand that too. And
Yeah.
I always think perhaps reductions in the commercial take was probably more effective than the rec take. Um,
Yeah.
but I just think, as anglers, we've got to be responsible and self-manage our resources as well. If um, if we blow it in terms of not respecting fish numbers and taking more than what we need, then we're just as accountable for it than the pros are and things like that. So I just it doesn't bother me. But I think I've seen oscillations in fish numbers on any given season. But a couple of years ago we had bumpy years where we were just getting huge amounts of Spanish, and then quiet periods. And I'm kind of expecting this year should be a good one. As you say, the weather systems have changed a bit, so yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But if New South Wales introduced limits similar to Queensland, it wouldn't bother me, but I know it would bother a few people. Yeah.
I mean, I just had some fragmented thoughts. I lost my thought process about the next question, but there is something that I circled back onto, and that was,
Okay.
I know we sort of talked about, like El Nino just sort of being like, yeah, this is the best. It's going to like change the weather from La Nina,
Yeah.
but it's sort of like wishing for drought. You know what I mean? So
It
it's
is
not in
almost.
that sense. I was just
It is
thinking,
almost.
I
Yeah.
was just
And
thinking that was what I must have sounded like, just talking about it, frothing at that thought of the driest season.
Perhaps we should clarify. We don't wish that upon anyone, particularly farmers and things like that. But I
Yeah,
think if we just look at that in isolation, it may have a positive impact on fish numbers,
yeah,
migration patterns and things like that. But you're right. We don't wish that for a drought
yeah.
again.
Now, I just remember the next question, which is relating to eating Spanish mackerel. Like you
Yep.
said, you don't eat too much of it. I know, like, I've only had one chance to try Spanish mackerel, and
Yep.
I shied away from it because,
Did you like it?
no, it wasn't that. It was the fact that I heard that it was it was a ciguatera risk, like a possible
Yeah.
risk, like not
Yeah.
as though it was guaranteed, and that was enough to, you know,
Put you off.
make me
Look.
quiver in my boots, so to speak.
Yeah. Look, it's a funny one, and this one, can open you up to an endless debate with people too. My view on this in particular is I have eaten very big Spanish. I'm talking 30 kilo plus fish, and never had any dramas with it. My wife eats it all the time. Never had any problems with it. I think sometimes people will catch fish and leave them on the deck of the boat in the hot sun all day, and then that gives them problems. But
Yeah,
in saying that, in all my years of fishing out of cost, I've never heard of anyone actually getting it. Um, I have heard of cases up in Queensland, so maybe it's more prevalent up there. I'm not really sure. Maybe it sort of flushes from their system when they're away from. I think it's some organisms or whatever on the coral reefs that actually cause ciguatera. I could be wrong there. Maybe by the time they hit the southern end of their migration, that's sort of flushed from the system to a degree. I don't know. I know New South Wales, like commercial operators are only allowed to sell to co-ops fish. I think they've got to be under 10 or 12 kilos. Don't quote me on that, but they're pretty small fish. They're not allowed to sell the big ones. So there is obviously a concern there. But from my
yeah,
personal experience, and I have eaten big Spanish. I've never had a dramas with it. Always, we get a real big one. I just give it to the neighbour first to make sure it is okay, and then we go from there. But
yeah,
look, I think sometimes people leave them on the deck of a boat all day, and then get cooked the next day, and think, well, maybe put some ice on it might help as well.
yeah. Obviously, this is not any sort of like dietary medical advice or anything, but
Sure.
it's just folks, it's just a bit of discussion, because actually maybe you should explain a little bit about ciguatera, because in New South Wales we don't get that, so a lot of my listeners won't know what that is.
Yeah, look, and I am a layman on this, and I may well get it wrong. And if anyone wants
So
to put in the
basically,
comments,
it affects reef fish and certain
yeah,
reef fish, right?
yeah,
So, and it's not every specimen of that particular species that may have it.
no, no, it is. I think it ties in. Well, it's triggered by something they eat. So yeah, you get red bass and Chinaman up on the reef. They're well known for
Yeah,
being potential ciguatera candidates, but that doesn't mean that every red bass you catch is going to have it. And you can probably eat a couple of red bass and get away with it. I also think that your big Spanish uh, eat these things. They eat everything, and then they're getting it as well. So there is that risk there. But as you say, it's not something that is endemic to a species and it's going to be in every individual of that species. It's just it might be concentrated in certain areas of the reef and what have you. And, fish in that area are a risk, but that's one of those things. Better safe than
yeah,
sorry. So some fish just
yeah,
have that image with them. But I just think I've never heard of it in New South Wales waters, and my theory is that maybe it sort of flushes from the system over time, and by that time they're down in our waters, they're pretty clean of it. But I haven't heard of any cases down our way.
yeah. Now let's move on and talk about chasing Spanish mackerel, like the techniques involved. So maybe let's talk about the three most popular techniques that you employ to do so.
Okay, so I think when we're talking about it, the ways to chase them,
Well, we know one of
definitely,
them already.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So well, definitely top water, stick
Yeah,
baiting. It's a great way, and like I said, it's very visual. You can do a lot of casts between fish and what have you, and a live bait will outfish a stick bait any day of the week, Shroom. I know people
yeah,
don't like to hear that, but what's the old saying? If you want to go fishing, use lures. If you want to catch fish, use bait. So that certainly rings true in some cases, and certainly with Spanish. But it is a visual, exciting form of fishing, throwing big stick baits, and
yeah.
never knowing on that next retrieve is a missile going to come out, and go 15 feet in the air with your stick bait. So I get all that. That certainly works. It's a great technique and good fun. Another technique that I have a lot of good luck with and is deadly effective is trolling hard-bodied lures. I think I showed you some of these before. So
Yeah.
X-Straps and my old favourite. You can't beat these. Halco Laser Pros in deep. And
Yeah.
if anyone wants a hot tip, that's the colour for me. The purple Halco Laser Pro is an absolute weapon.
Nice.
So trolling them is great. I think you got to do the troll hard body lures in specific areas. I find I have a lot of luck around islands and
Yeah.
things like that where Spanish tend to congregate. And the beauty of that is, like we discussed before, you're in Wahoo country as well. So, you're never really sure when that reel starts screaming what's actually eating it. Casting stick baits, trolling hard bodies are great techniques. And then the third one is obviously baits, and that can be divided into two main sort of ways, and that's live baits and dead baits. So where we are in northern New South Wales, trolling uh, live slimy mackerel is a great and very effective technique to get Spanish and spotties.
Yep.
If you can find a slimy, then you're pretty much and you're in that right peak time in the season, you're pretty much guaranteed getting a mackerel. And that's it can be very frustrating when the slimies aren't thick. Yellowtail are the sort of the B grade bait. They'll still get eaten, but then if you get a slimy, then you're looking good. So that's trolling live baits, and then also a technique we use quite a lot is to anchor up on a known spot and put live baits out under balloons.
Yep.
That works really well. And then the other side of bait fishing is dead baits, so trolling dead baits. And that's if you want a really really big Spanish mackerel. You kind of hang on around at the end of the season, that sort of June, July period when you're first starting to wear jumpers
Yep.
up on our part of the coast. And if you rig a big dead Taylor shroom or a big dead bonito, and I'm talking, baits this big, bigger the better.
Like
Some
shark
people
baits
look at
almost.
it, shark baits, and you slow troll them around sort of 1 or 2 knots around, the islands and things like that, or even riding close on the headlands, which we can discuss in a minute where are the best places to target and when. But those big dead baits, that's where you'll get your big 25 kilo plus fish.
Yeah. So slimy mackerel is obviously the best live bait. Yakas is probably something you could get, but one step down. What about other baits such as squid? You guys troll squid because we do that a lot in New South Wales, down near Sydney.
Yeah, no, not really. I think it really has to be fish baits. So I think your prime baits, slimy mackerel, yellowtail. Taylor are a good bait. Bonito are a great bait. The problem with Taylor and Bonito is that their life expectancy when you try them live, they don't they don't hold on too well. So you can
No,
try
they don't.
if you pin a slimy right, you can troll him all day. But a tailor will clap out pretty quick, and then they'll sort of start spinning. And once they start spinning, mackerel won't they wisen up to it. So they make great dead baits.
Yeah.
Bonito, I think, and they're probably pike. Pike are a good bait. Pike again, they can be a bit fragile, but you put a big pike out under a balloon or something like that, he won't live long. If he's in mackerel country, they're not a great troll bait. And your missus will hate you when you get home because you'll be covered in slime. But they are a good bait under a balloon. I know that much.
Yeah.
So they're probably the main baits that we use, but not squid. I know the guys up the Goldie. They use pilchers with pretty deadly effect. Just the old humble pilchers with a
Oh, really?
pink skirt in
Nice.
front
Yeah.
of it. Yeah. Whereas, and even just pilchers, gang hooks out under balloons, they do it up there. But we don't do a lot of that. We sort of focus on trying to really get those live baits. Because, like I said, if you can get a good live prime slimy mackerel, then half the battle's over.
Yeah. Excellent. What about like we talked a little bit about using surface lures. Do you do much of that? And is there a specific technique or lure type?
Look, I do a little bit of it. Like I think I said to you before, you can if I know the mackerel are on and they're thick, if they're showing up on the sounder, or if I am getting a lot of hits on the lures, the troll lures, then I'll pull up and stick bait. But I think if you really, you can go out and have a lot of stick baiting sessions and not get a lot of fish. So I
Yeah.
need to have some kind of confirmation that there's fish around, and then I'll pull up and I'll do it. But anything like the nomads, they're a great sort of stick bait. The Marias, and these aren't huge stick baits. These are sort of in that was it 7-inch range, I think, through 'em.
Yeah.
I don't go into types and brands too much, whatever. Just that. I think Spanish mackerel, they're a real hit and run predator. So as long as that thing's moving and it's doing a bit of metallic flash, they'll hit it. And so as far as technique goes, just pretty fast sweeps. When you stick baiting for them, it works. Same as like for GTs, I guess. So pretty quick sweeps. And then really fast burns. Just get that thing skipping along the top. Will usually trigger them. And
Yeah.
that's I have a lot of luck with old school metals from the old irons from the 80s.
Oh,
I've got a
yes.
lot of those, and I was going to say these things, they're like sort of GT ice creams with that type of lure. Yeah, they're great. They're
Yeah.
like a garfish imitation. So that type of thing that works great. Just wine and flat out, as long as they are skipping across the surface or giving that distressed bait fish look that we all know and love. You'll attract the interest of Spanish mackerel for sure.
Yeah. Let's talk about like areas like general terrains and structure that you might find these fish. We've already sort of touched on, say around the islands in certain times of the year and stuff like that. Yeah, let's elaborate a bit on that.
Okay, so I guess when I say islands, I'm talking specifically about the Solitary Islands Marine Park, and within that, there's a number of islands. So there's South Solitary, Split Solitary, Groper, North Solitary, Northwest. So there's probably about don't quite me 7 or 8 islands within that, and a couple of rocks as well. And that comprises of the Solitary Islands Marine Group, and it's a well-known mackerel haunt. I think and you've got a lot of followers from Sydney, and I know a lot of them come up for their one holiday a year to fish up there. So they're good areas because easy to identify. And I'm sort of not giving away any local secrets there. They're all well-known spots for mackerel. I would
Yeah.
always say the wider islands are always the better ones. So North Solitary up off Wooleye is a great one. But if you're going to fish that, just treat that bar with respect when you're crossing the Wooleye bar. And then closer to home off Coffs, South Solitary, or we call it the Lighthouse, it's got a big lighthouse on it. Locals call it the Lighthouse. They're your better islands, those two, because they're a bit wider, they're big, and they get hit by the most current when the EAC is really kicking in. One critical piece of advice I would give when you're fishing islands is pick the end where the current's hitting. If you go down the other end, so if I'm fishing South Solitary and the current's coming north to south, if I fish down the south end, may as well take your hooks off because you're not going to get any fish. But if you go up the north end, then that's where they'll be. Every time they'll be sitting up there. You'll see the fusiliers sitting up there, and that's where they'll be. If the current's coming or running uphill, as we say, down the south end is where the fish will be. So really just take that time when you get out there, shut your motor off, have a little drift, and just watch from. Okay, I'm going south here, so I'm going to go up the other end, and that's where the current's heading. That's where the fish will be. So, and that's the islands. And look, there's no hard and fast rules there. I just the western sides are not as prolific fish producers as the eastern sides. I always troll the seaward sides of these islands, but kind of do figure of eights. But I'd see sort of some people visit and they'll just do laps around the island. You're kind of wasting half your time there because really those western sides aren't as good. And also be mindful of the marine park sanctuary zones as well. That's the islands, and then sort of in addition to that, you've got your deeper reefs. So Spanish will tend to hold. Well, they will be on headlands just off the beach in 6 metres of water, right out till about, I guess, 50 to 60 metres of water. That's usually their kind of depth range. There's always exceptions, and they'll be out deeper sometimes. But really, I like those reefs in that sort of 15 to 40 metre range. And so off that northern New South Wales part of the coast, there's plenty of that. So whether it's off Coffs or Southwest Rocks or off Ballina or wherever, Yamba, lots of those inshore reefs in that 20 to 40 metre range. And again, if you've got sea maps or navionics these days, you can find them. And they all will produce fish at any time of the year. So me not mentioning particular areas is not trying to withhold information from your listeners. It actually just reflects the fact that any of these reefs that you can see on these maps at any given time during the mackerel run will hold fish. And I will, I'll go to all of them and check, and if I've got bait on them, and if there's current hitting them, then I'll put baits in or lures down and give it a hit. If it's looking dead on the sounder, then let's move on to the next one. Sometimes I tend to try to work. I usually start in really shallow early. That sunrise bite is when the mackerel will be on those headlands. And as it gets a bit deeper, then I'll sort of go out to the deeper reefs and prospect around and just look for activity. And bait's always the big key. If you can see balls of bait, sitting on reefs, then that's where your fish will be. And quite often you'll mark Spanish because they're quite big fish, so they'll always give a reading on sounders if they're there. So that's the reefs, and I think I've hinted a few times, and it is another one thing that I guess a lot of people overlook with Spanish mackerel is they will be right in close sometimes.
Right.
And northern New South Wales has a lot of beaches, so there's headlands on all these beaches, and a lot of them are great mackerel producers. But you've got to hit them pretty early. So they're sunrise bites, and go and get your slimies, and then go and slow troll those slimies right up against the rocks. You're almost leaving your paint from your boat on the rocks, and you'll be surprised at how close and how shallow those big fish are in.
Yeah, I was just about to go into talking about conditions, time of day, tides, moon phase, anything that might affect them, barometer, bait. Like bait, is there any specific types of bait? You said fusiliers.
Well, fusiliers for the islands, definitely, because you'll only get fusies out at the islands, and it's only the really wide ones. So like South Solitary and North Solitary, you'll get schools of fusies out there. On the reefs, on the inshore reefs, it's usually yakkers or yellowtail, and slimy schools is what you're looking for. Slimies will usually be up on the surface, and you'll see them sort of shimmering around, and yakkers are generally down deep. And you'll see the big lines if the mackerel are there on your sounder, but you've got to have those bait schools, whether it's slimies or yakkers or both of them. Generally, if I can find slimy schools, then happy days. I'm going to stay there for a while. But you really need to have bait showing up. I think because mackerel are they're a pelagic fish, and if they sweep down past the reef and there's nothing there, they'll just keep going till they find bait. So like snapper, you can keep going back to the same reef, and there'll be resident reds there or reds that are there quite often. But no, Spanish mackerel they're on the move the whole time. In terms of other kind of weather conditions, I don't think mackerel are as sensitive to moon phases as say snapper are. If the moon's up and she's a full moon, I won't even bother going snapper fishing. But mackerel, probably around that full moon is not the best time for them. It's the run up and a few days after, and around that new moon is probably the best time. I will say one thing that's borne out from experience is that those overcast, slightly drizzly days when you got nice, beautiful sou'westers blowing, and it sort of just slightly ruffles the surface a bit. Not too much swell, but a little bit of drizzle and cloud cover. I love that. When you get mornings like that, you always get that feeling that it's going to be on. And the same with longtails. I think they are a little bit shy when it's full blown light on the surface.
Yep.
The mackerel bite tends to shut down around at sort of 9, 10 o'clock. But if you can get a really good overcast day with a bit of drizzle, they'll bite much longer. And I just think that when the sun's up on a real clear day, it can tend to shut them down a little bit. Yeah, there's always
Yep.
exceptions, but I think I really like those overcast days. Yeah,
Do they bite in the night?
Well, yeah, good question. Well, I've never really fished for them, but at night time. But I know that we've had times when we've been out and we've had red hot bites, say in an afternoon. Uh, every balloon you put out is going off, or every lure you put in is getting hammered. And there will be a point when that sun does go down behind, the horizon, that it sort of does shut down, and you sort of pull in lures and go home. So, in answer to your question, I'd say no, they don't really bite that well at night. But also, we're not really doing it. But we're not doing it because when we get fishing those late afternoon periods, there is that sort of time when we get a certain darkness on it. They just sort of go off and you go home.
Yeah.
So I would say from my experience that they're not a night feeder.
Yeah, I guess so. It wouldn't make sense. Who's really offshore at night?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I wouldn't like to be a bait fish hanging around Spanish mackerel at night time, but I just think for fishermen, it's really I wouldn't bother chasing them at night time.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about gear just to sort of brush over it in case anyone's interested in doing this sort of fishing.
Yep. Oh, look, that's how long is a piece of string question. You can go as expensive as you want, or you can go sort of relatively cheap. But I would say with mackerel, you do need, in terms of reels, like relatively good quality stuff, because when a big mackerel hits, if you've got a reel that's not up to the task, you'll soon know about it. I've had reels blow up, during a mackerel run or something, just sheerly from the speed
Yeah,
and power in them. So I've got a couple here I can show you. This is like a Shimano Tiernos.
yeah,
I use 10, 15 kilo on that. Talikas, if you want to go a little bit more expensive, they're a fantastic little reel. But if you're a bit more budget conscious, these ones are great for the money. I think
yeah,
uh, just on that, if I'm trolling lures and stuff, I tend to always use mono. It's just got a little bit more give in it. But if you're stick baiting things like that, you can use braid. But I just tend to, if I'm trolling, I usually use mono.
yeah,
Thread lines like a 10,000 size reel is all you need. You don't have to go too expensive on them. Uh, and and in terms of rods, obviously I'm using say 10 to 15 kilo mono, so I'll be using rods that are rated up to 30 pound. You want a little bit of fast taper, I think. Mackerel don't have soft mouths. Once your hooks are in, they're usually in quite good. The only thing that will cause problems with keeping hooking is they do a lot of head kicks. When you fight a mackerel, you've got a mackerel on pretty much straight away, because as soon as that run finishes, you'll feel the head starting to kick, and that's when you can pull hooks. So
yeah,
more important probably than the type of rod you're using is to always ensure, like most fish, is to really keep tension on, stay tight. Because if you give them any slack and they sort of kick their head, the lures fall out and hooks fall out pretty quick. Um, but I don't think you need to spend millions of dollars on tackle to chase Spanish mackerel. I think just a simple overhead outfit in that 10 to 15 kilo kind of class, if you want to troll, and if you want to throw stick baits and thread lines, that 10,000 size is all you need. If you're up throwing stick baits and GTs, you want the big gear, PE8, PE10 type stuff, but PE3, PE4 is all you need for Spanish.
yeah,
The big problem is really sharks. You've got to get them in quicker. So I tend to these days. Back in the old days, soon when I was a young bloke, in answer and sport fishing was all the rage. We were using 4 kilo, 6 kilo, 8 kilo mono
yeah,
with all our Spanish mackerel fishing. That was the thing. You spend almost 45 minutes on a fish on 45 on 4 kilo line, but you can't do that anymore, because the sharks will just hammer it. So now I'm
yeah,
fishing sort of 15 kilo to get them in fast, particularly around the islands, because that's where the sharks are pretty withering. So my only suggestion there would be that if you're putting an outfit together, maybe err on the side of a little bit heavier,
heavier.
just to get them in. Yeah, yep.
Do we have a shark problem? You think, or
Yes, I think we do. And in terms of, is it a well, it's a problem that you do lose. Well, I'd say the increasing amount of fish lost to sharks every year.
Yeah.
The problem is a combination of things. That is, there's obviously greater numbers of sharks, but they're also wisening up. There's a couple of my episodes there where I'm trolling for mackerel around South Solitary, and I actually show viewers when I stop my motor or when I stop the boat, sorry, and put it in neutral when I've got a fish close to the boat. You watch your sounder, and you'll see big arches coming in. So they're not stupid. They know that when you're pulling up, that you're going to bring
Yeah.
a fish in, and I'll just wait for it. And yeah, it can get pretty soul destroying. But I fished those islands all my life, so we're talking 35 years fishing there, and yeah, they're worse now than I can ever recall them.
Yeah. So you definitely have like personal historical data going back
Yeah, I mean
35
it's
years and
anecdotal, obviously, because I'm no
yeah.
scientist, but it is direct experience fishing those same spots year after year after year, so you can see a pattern. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think particularly 2022 with the floodwaters, the sharks love that brown stuff, and they were in it. I had a lot of problems getting fish to the boat that year, but back in the old days, you might have one or two shark, sharkings every season, but now it's one or two every session kind of thing. So yeah, they've certainly become more of a problem than they used to be.
Yeah. So let's talk about the next several months, heading into obviously the new year and all that. Someone that wants to chase some Spanish mackerel or maybe even just have a chance at that, but also get, plenty of bycatch. You've mentioned spotted mackerel, wahoo, and, hosts of other species up in northern New South Wales. What's something they can do to actively target these fish in terms of structure and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, right. So I think, as I mentioned before, when the run starts, and it'll be starting soon. So we'll start to get fish off our waters, just after Christmas. They'll be here. Someone usually picks one up, between Christmas and New Year's, and that starts the gold rush. When the mackerel rush hits costs, it's on.
Yeah.
The other bit of advice is if you want to launch your boat, get down there early when the mackerel rush is on because it's bedlam. But they do seem to follow a bit of an order of arrival, I'd say. So, like I said, early on in the year, so January, I'd be targeting the islands. That'd be me. I'd be putting lures in because lures allow you to cover more water and find more fish, and they are a little bit more sporadic at the start of the run. So I'd be bolting straight up the islands, putting hard bodies in, and then trying to find fish that way. As we move into February and March, and even a little bit in April, then I actually shift and I go right in close and I'm off the headlands. So sometimes I'm only anchoring 200 or 300 meters out, from a headland, as long as you're
Yeah.
on reef, and then I'll be live baiting under balloons. So it's strange, but yeah, January, a little bit of February, out the islands, and then sort of mid-February I come right in close. But the good thing about being out the islands around that time is that's when you will be getting your wahoo. We get a good run of yellowfin tuna out around the islands, but they're only little sort of bullet tuna, that sort of 5-7 kilo mark. But they are, you can set
Yeah.
your watch by them too. They'll be out there. And sometimes they actually get really annoying because you want to get your lures and keep them in the water for a wahoo or a Spanish, but it's just hordes of little yellowfin, which is a nice problem to have shroom sometimes.
That is a nice problem.
Yeah. But yeah, so that sort of mid-February on, I'll move right in close, and that's when I find the fish are on the inshore reefs, and then I'll stay in there and I'll chase my mackerel and my longtails and what have you, right up until about April, and then sort of May, June, you can sense that the fish are starting to think about heading home again. Are they going to go north? So then I start to go deeper. The deeper reefs, you're finding those reefs in that 40-meter line. That's when you really start to get good mackerel numbers out there. And then July, August, September, I'm back out the islands again. So you can sort of,
Yeah.
there's a pattern there. They arrive, they hit the islands, they filter in inshore reefs, and then as things start to cool, they're moving out to deeper water. And then the last kind of group of fish before they all take off north, they hang around the islands for a bit. But in all those areas, you are up for good bycatch. Like I said, the islands, wahoo, kings, amberjacks, and in close, longtails and spotties. I mean, we always think of spotty mackerel as the lesser cousin to the Spanish, but they're equally as popular off coffs and northern New South Wales as the Spanish are. And I think a lot of people, or some people actually prefer them in terms of their culinary, taste and what have you.
Yep.
They're a smaller mackerel, obviously, but they can be quite prolific and bloody good fun. When if you're anchored up in close and you're putting out your slimies under balloons and you got a good spotty bite on, baits are going off left, right, and centre stream. You have those days where you can't get that second rod out, and that's a ball. You can have a ball. So, but they'll only be in close. You don't get the spotties out wide. You don't get them on the deep reefs, and you don't get them on the islands. The odd one will turn up, but you really want spotties in close in that sort of 15, 20 metre reefs and right on the headlands. So I think that's the pattern that I tend to follow. Obviously, you got to, like I said, keep your ear to the ground. Talk to the guys in the boat ramp. Every year's different. That is generally the pattern they'll follow off our part of the coast. And I think I mentioned before, they're getting later. So, I've last couple of seasons I've been getting fish in September, which is unheard of. 20 years ago, you told someone, "Oh, there'll be still mackerel here in September," they would have laughed at you. I was getting longtails off the rocks in September. Again, unheard of. So whether that was because we had a really good current last year, they got longtails down off Tathra Wharf, which they haven't done since the 80s. So that may have resulted in fish hanging around longer. Don't know, but I have seen over the last few seasons that they arrive later and they're leaving later. So
actually, that's a good point there. I did hear about maybe this year the warmer currents are going to stick around the south near me a lot longer, and we were expecting like a lot more exotics riding the EAC coming down. So
well, I think I mean, last season I know they got sails way down south. There was a sailfish caught down off Jervis Bay or something. There was snapper being caught off Tasmania, which was like a first. And like I said, longtails again off Tathra Wharf. When I was growing up, I used to read the fishing magazines, and you see photos of blokes holding longtails off Tathra Wharf, and then that all disappeared. But it seems to be happening again, and that's purely because of the warmer water going further south. And I guess that's the other thing I should mention too when you're looking at your mackerel off our part of the world. Water temperature. Water temperature, clarity's not so important, but temperature is. You really want at least 21 degree water. But if you can get it up around 22, 23, 24, then you're in the zone. And if you want to mix it up with wahoo, 24 plus is what you're looking for. And just a little tip on the wahoo for our part of the world anyway, they'll only be at the islands. You don't get them in close. And if you look at the sea surface charts, and you'll see when the east coast current comes down. It doesn't come down in one constant stream. It'll pulse down, So you'll get, you watch it. I use the Bureau of Meteorology's sea surface charts. It's a good one. And then you can hit a button and it goes to active. So it's sort of like a 7-day forecast. And you'll see yet pulses of warm water coming down. So there might be a little sort of lip of 24, 25 degree water, 26. And then behind that there's 24, 23. But the wahoo will be in that front part. So when you watch that coming down the coast and you see it's about to hit the islands, bolt out, because they'll only be there for 2 or 3 days, and then they're gone again. And then you got to wait like a week or 2 weeks for the next pulse to come down. But I watch them. And I think since I've been doing that, your wahoo capture rate improves dramatically.
Wow.
So that's if you're into your wahoo, and let's face it, who's not? They're great fish. But certainly that water temperature is another critical thing with mackerel and longtails too. Longtails, they tolerate a lower water temperature. I've got them down in 19, 18 degrees. But mackerel, they're a little bit more prissy. They want that 21 plus.
Yeah. Does it ever get too warm for them, or?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they come from all over northern Australia, and they're up in water temps of 28, 30. So, but I do find that that optimal range for where we are really is between 22 and 24. You find that sort of water, and that's where the fish will be.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we might get water sometimes at 25, 26 where we are, and that's usually out wide, way up over the shelf. But certainly in close, it usually is around that sort of low 20s.
All right. So we talked a little bit about gear and all that, but we actually didn't mention anything about rigs. So let's just circle back to that and talk about how you rig your wires for mackerel.
Yeah, we actually probably left out the most important part, Shroom, because your wire rigs for mackerel. Well, firstly, if you don't use wire, you're just going to get laughed at because they have probably the best set of chompers in the business. They don't call them a member of the razor gang for nothing. And fishing for mackerel without wire, unless you can fluke one like I did when my first ever fish I caught. You're just going to get bitten off every time. So it's essential that you use wire. Whether you use it, let's cover lures first. Some people don't use wire at all on lures. They're taking a
Yep.
punt that the fish is going to hit the lure, at the body of the lure and then hook up. And the theory being that mackerel can shy off wire and you'll get a better strike rate without it, but you
Yep.
will lose lures. My my problem with that, and I always rig them. I've always got wire on. I don't know whether you can see that or not.
Yep.
So I use it religiously because mackerel, when you look at their head, they're actually quite they got a long head, and a wahoo is almost double the length. So like a 15 kilo wahoo has a head almost like this long. So if I'm sort of trolling that, it's 9 times out of 10, it's going to eat the whole thing. And if you've got no wire on, you've got no hope. And I don't think there's a big diminution in strike rate because you're not using wire. So I think when you're trolling your lures, if you value your lures and you hip pocket, put some wire on. Single strand versus multi strand, I've got no real view on it. I just use single.
Yep.
And for the offshore, for the wider trolling stuff, I use 69-pound single strand, so it's a little bit heavier than what I use in close. But again, that's because there's a good chance that a wahoo is going to jump on and the speed and really with wahoo, why I troll the islands with 15 kilo gear and 60-pound leaders or 80-pound leaders and heavier wire is because a wahoo hits with such blinding speed. And when you're trolling a lure with a bib this size, there's a lot of pressure. You're trying to troll this lure at sort of 9, 10, 11 knots. There's a lot of pressure on your gear, and then you couple that with a wahoo hitting it at lightning speed. You need that beefed up, tackle to be able to withstand that hit. Not such a big problem when you're fishing purely for mackerel in close, which I'll get to in a minute. So always rig your lures on wire. Whether you choose multi-strand or single strand is really up to you. Some people think multi gives a better action to the lure. I don't know, I've never had any problems with single strand, and I just find that easy to rig. I keep my wire rigs pretty short, so that's the swivel there. You can see that's only really almost the length of the lure. Some people will go longer again. I find if I can keep that swivel close to the lure, I get less bite-offs from competitive wahoo. So if this gets eaten by a wahoo and you've got, like a metre or so of wire trace and then a swivel up here, that swivel, when the wahoo hits it and is taken off on his first run, that swivel creates its own bubble trail. And competitive wahoo will come and hit that, and you get slipped off, and you get really frustrating. But I found that sort of reducing the size, they're less inclined to hit that bubble trail when it's really close to the mouth of another wahoo, if that makes sense.
Right, okay.
Just something I found. So I keep my traces pretty short. You do also run the occasional risk that a massive wahoo is going to eat a whole lot. But,
that's the game. That's the game you've got to play.
Can't win them all. Yeah. So that's lures. Slightly heavier, 69-pound wire at least. Little slightly beefed up swivels, and troll them on 15 kilo, and that's why, because a lot of pressure, big hits, big fast hits, big fast fish. So you want to beef it up. When I'm in close and I'm trolling live slimies, or I've got a bait out under a balloon, I'll go down to as light as 44-pound single strand. But I won't fish that on tackle any heavier than 10 kilo. If you're fishing 44-pound wire on, say, a 15 kilo outfit and you're fishing it heavy, there's a good chance that a mackerel can kind of chew through that. So a little bit more finesse in close, because you don't have the high pressures that you do when you're trolling the lures. And it is a thing that the lighter you go with your wire, the less likely you're going to have mackerel shy off it. So I like 44. I use if I'm trolling live baits, I use like a live bait hook. So that's it's an inline hook, so it's not offset. You don't want an offset hook when you're trolling, because I'm pinning them up through the top lip only. Some people pin them through both bottom and top lips, but I just use the top lip. And then it's a 2-hook rig, so it's an inline 40, 50, so quite small for a hook. A little bit of wire out the front of that, and then what we call a stinger running off the back. So from that main hook, you've got another piece of wire, depending on the size of the live bait that you're using, to a treble, and quite a small treble I use as well. And that's all on 44-pound, because you're trolling that dead slow. So with your lures, like I said before, 8 to 12 knots depending on the lure type, so that's quite fast. But when
Yeah.
you're trolling live baits, it's dead slow. It's just in gear, so it's that 1 knot kind of stuff. So
Right.
you don't have
Okay.
all that
Yeah.
pressure load up from a big hit. So you can finesse it a little bit more. And like many things in fishing, as you would know yourself, and it's even you probably know better than most when you're fishing, heavily populated waters like Sydney. The lighter you can go, the more you can finesse it, the more you're going to induce a bite. And it's the
Yeah.
same with mackerel. So I tend to go as light as I can when I'm slow trolling live baits and dead baits and ballooning in close. But so for me, it's 44 pound single strand when I'm using baits, and then sort of 69 on my lures, just for that, like I said, just that little bit more beefed up outside.
Excellent. Well, Rob Taylor, thanks very much for all this wonderful information about mackerel, especially
My pleasure.
Spanish mackerel.
Yeah,
This. I think this podcast here, everyone's going to enjoy listening to this one. I actually learned so much just tonight, just talking with you tonight about this, and you know, there's got to be some people that you want to thank that have contributed to how far you've come as an angler, or as a writer, as a YouTuber.
oh yeah. Look, bloke by the name of Keith Bobbin. He was my schoolmate who dragged me out to the front of Muckbird Island way back when I must have been 12 or 13, and I got my first longtail. And then he was with me when I caught that extra unlucky Spanish mackerel. So, Keith, if you're listening, mate, thank you for getting me into it. I know that first longtail, that was it for me. I was hooked. But yeah, thank you for having me, Shroom. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. And hopefully, some of the listeners can take something away from that. And I would just say, if you haven't done it before, somewhere between February and May, come up the coast and chase Spanish mackerel. They've got it all. They're the complete package. They're fast. They fight good. They're great on the table. And that head, when you see it come out of the water, it's just all business. It's good fun.
Yeah. Also, let the followers know, the viewers, the listeners know, because also this is a podcast that's on video, so they'll be able to watch it, not just listen to it. How can they find you? Or what are your socials?
So the socials. Well, I've got a YouTube channel, and there is a lot of actual Spanish mackerel fishing from northern New South Wales on there. So if you really like your Spanish mackerel and you want to learn some more, it's all there. Trolling, live baiting, all that sort of stuff. Rocks, boats, kayaks, and it's called Rob Taylor's Hotwater. I've named it Hotwater because everyone always asks me this, because every year we all wait for that hot water to come down. When the water's hot, that's when it's on. So it's called Rob Taylor's Hotwater, and same on Instagram, Rob Taylor's Hotwater, and I've got a Facebook page as well. So
Yeah.
and that just really covers fishing in this part of the world. Because one last thing I will say, Shroom, is if you do go to the trouble, I mean, we all know you planned this fishing trip for years, or you're going to Weeper and you lost your longtail, but you plan a fishing trip, you're just about to go, everything's packed up, and the weather turns on you. Yeah, and good thing about our area is if that happens and you come out and you want to chase mackerel, we've got great bass fishing. We've got trout. A lot of people get quite shocked about that, but 2 hours from my door, I can go and catch brown trout up in New England. This is one of the few places in the world where you can actually get a trout in the morning and a blue marlin in the afternoon, if you wanted to do that. But great flathead fishing. We've got some great river systems up here. Mangrove jack in summer, it's good fun. Little GTs in the rivers. So if you do get up here and the weather turns, there's plenty of other options. Mackerel aren't the only ones on there. But, if you can give it 2 or 3 or 4 days, you'll always get that little break where you can get out. And the last thing I will say, the beauty of mackerel is that when I say I'm fishing the headlands, you get any kind of west in the wind, then you can actually fish even in quite windy conditions or big swells, because you can just sneak out of the harbour, sneak up to a local headland, and it's kind of it's quite flat. So there's always something you can do up here in terms of fishing.
Fantastic. Yeah, so ladies and gents, that's Rob Taylor's Hotwater on YouTube, on Instagram. I'll definitely have a link in the description below with that as well, with the information. But for now, this is it. This is it for Shroom Live, and I'm your host, Shroom, and I'll catch you next time.